Welcome back. It's Sarah and Amanda, Indianapolis versus Colorado. We're close to, we're far, we're separated by a few hundred or 1,000 or so miles, but together in spirit, probably every single day. Not a day goes by where, what have you seen? Did you see this? I saw this on a report. What does that mean? Do you have any research? What protocol should I use? And on and on. That's practicing with people you trust. So, but we are talking today in this podcast about something that I think trends every day in the science, that trends every day on social media, in chat forums, and clinically as well. And so we're talking about folate. And the title of this session that we're going to unpack, well, the topic is Folate Frenzy. Is your breakfast making you anxious? Where are they going to with that? Before we even go down the folic acid anxiety and what's that got to do with breakfast pathway, we wanted to chat about tea because Sarah and I both love tea.
Yes,
and right, you sent me tea, I've sent you tea, and then you sent me tea last week. So let's talk about tea and the tea we love and some of the brands we love.
On tea. Yeah, we'll give you the tea on tea.
The tea on tea.
Maybe people don't know this, but I early on, when after my husband and I got married, we lived in Dallas because he's worked for Texas Instruments for going on 18 years now. So I was coaching volleyball there, and then I used to frequent this tea shop called Sterling Tea, which is in Rockwall, Texas. So I would go over and I would get some work done, before practice and work on my, lesson plans and everything. And I got to know the owner really well, and her name is Brenda Sterling Myers, and we're still very good friends today. But she would, one day she needed help with her computer, and she's like, "This isn't working." I was like, "Well, let me take a look at it," and I fixed it. And I was like, "Hey, I would love to maybe just come in and work a couple days a week and bag tea." And she's like, "Don't you think you're a little overqualified for that?" And I said, "No, because I can walk in, I can clock in, I can label bags and, bag tea and ship it out. And then I can clock out at the end of the day." And really that's kind of like having a boundary with work. And there's something really beautiful about a job that you get to clock in and clock out, unlike being a business owner now for you and I. But so I used to blend and serve and sell and, work with customers, and I really loved it. So I appreciate the ways in which my tea background has equipped me now as a dietitian to be able to do not just tea education, but also to talk about the bioactives that are in our tea and our herbs that we use in tea. Like matcha is just so wonderfully magical that, the tea leaf is grown the same way. It's just picked and processed differently between white, green, and black. But matcha is grown in shade. And so we keep the bioactive compounds exceptionally high, and it's, ceremonial grade in Japan. I know, maybe getting a little off on a tangent, but you just sit back and you really appreciate, like, what is tea, and steeping it in something in hot water and releasing, this aromatic beverage that you get to enjoy again and again. And it's my self-care. It's like, I'm sad, drink tea. I'm mad, drink tea. I'm, happy, drink tea. So it's, it's something I can recreate, and I can control it and bring tea with me wherever I go. So, yeah.
And I find that I'm choosing tea. I mean, so many stories here, but I choose tea exactly based on my mood. I know, like, I need the meadow blend today, or I need the black French. It's a black tea with French lavender, and it brings in something else. So I was thinking the other day, I have so many boxes of packages of tea. I need like a chest to organize all this stuff, And of course, you see those in the stores or what have you. But
well, I buy it by the pound, and the bags that I get, from Sterling Tea are 200 cups of tea in a pound. And so you should come see my tea
oh
collection.
my
It's not
Lord,
just
yeah,
boxes of bags, it is bags of pounds of
of
tea.
pounds. Like you have
Oh,
tea bags, like or people have coffee bean,
yep,
collection or whatever.
yep, not even
Um,
kidding.
You sent me, and I have it, and then I actually ordered some more. So just talking about brands we like, and we're not sponsored, by the way. This is just us, and I want to talk a tiny bit about therapeutic value of tea, and then we'll jump into our topic. But you sent me, and I still use, and still order from Palais d'été, or the Tea Palace, which is in Phoenix, I think, right? And it was like a verbena, orange, like I forget, thyme, something like that. Tea blend is gorgeous. So I
Yeah,
love them.
my friend Elena got me that for my birthday last year, and I loved it so much I bought it again. And then I was like, Amanda would like this,
I
I
would
think.
like
It's
this, so I got
herbal.
them too.
Yeah, it's got like a
Um,
citrusy,
oh yeah, it was citrusy. It's just beautiful. So, there's the therapeutic side we can talk about, but there's also like the soothing side that's got nothing to do with therapy. It's like that is going to taste good, or it's cold, so I want that, or I want to be warmed up or cooled down. And then I discovered this tea maker in Oregon, in Portland. And it turns out that the guy actually originally started Stash Tea, which, is kind of, you can find in supermarkets everywhere now. But he left that business, sold that business, went to France for a couple of years, and he came back and started to blend tea again. So he blends, it's Smith Tea Maker out of
Mm,
Oregon, which I sent you some Meadow, I think, was that
hmm.
what I said? Just
Yeah, it
amazing. He's like,
sounds really good.
yeah, so we love our teas. And, it's interesting. I work around the world. I think you do too, Sarah. So I have clients right now in Germany. And I will say to them, look, what you actually need to do right now is you're going to go to the apotheca or the pharmacy because they're both in Germany, but they can go to Italy, Switzerland, or Austria. And the pharmacists blend tea. I don't know if you remember that. So
Oh,
you can
I
pick
did
up
not
like
know that.
bladder tea, liver tea, and and it's by body part, if you will. But you know full well when you look at the flora and fauna they're using, what they're doing. They are literally targeting like gut motility or heartburn or what have you, and they're using the flora or kind of more acting as herbalists with these tea blends. So the therapeutic tea blends. So I can literally say to them, go here, get that tea blend. Here's what's in it, and here's what it's going to do for you. So we're using it.
Mm.
Yeah, therapeutically.
Yeah, and I think that's something I definitely try to encourage my clients to do is instead of taking a supplement, like a tea is such a wonderfully like gentle way. You're
It is.
A hydration, B like you're getting the bioactives from something in a much gentler way, and you could just get to enjoy a beverage that tastes good.
Exactly.
It's way more sustainable for your budget to do a tea than it is to do a supplement.
And no
Ashwagandha,
kidding.
for example, like ashwagandha can definitely set people over the edge. So why not do it as a tea instead of as an expensive
Agree.
supplement, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it could be very, yeah, that is just me and ashwagandha. We have to have early morning friendship, or tiny, like tiny amounts. Gosh, there was something, the tea that I am recommending the most, or what I ask people to look for, is either like a lemon balm, something with lemon balm in it, or rosemary, or a blend, or infuse both of them. Because what we see so often looking at genetics is, and this is more so in the mental health, cognitive health, anxiety area, or ADHD, is people have a gene variant in their GABA receptor. So the gene is presented as GABA, and it's encoding the GABA receptor. And so lemon balm or anything that has rosmarinic acid, so you're thinking like rosemary, for example, can actually help push GABA into the receptor. So if the receptor is a little wonky, here you can use tea therapeutically, sit down, soothing, but it actually has this active role. And I've seen when I'm talking with parents, if they're dealing with a child with ADHD, it's so often I'll say, okay, we can use lemon balm here. And the mom will say, he or she loves lemon. Like they love it. And lemon's not a big flavor for a 6-year-old. You think about it. And yet innately these children are gravitating to a really big flavor for a child. And it's like their innate intelligence is stepping forward saying, this is good for me. And they reach for it along with anything else. But I thought that was such an interesting
Yeah,
observation.
that
Isn't
is
it?
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think I knew that about lemon balm. I just love a
Yeah.
variety of tea, so you just go for everything. But one of my favorite teas too is another place down in Arizona in Phoenix is Loose Leaf Tea Market, and they make
Mm-hmm.
this lush lavender
Yes.
tea that has butterfly blue pea flower. And I've done presentations with my kids' school on the chemistry of the anthocyanins and the acid base reaction. So
That's right.
turning it colors by adding baking soda and adding lemon juice. and they're
Yeah.
amazed, like they think it's the coolest thing. And but it has butterfly blue pea flower in it. It has lemongrass, lemon balm, lavender, and hibiscus. So it's got, some really great herbs in there, and yeah, love
That
it.
is awesome. I'm trying to think how you blend that for a kid. Do you can you rehydrate it, process it, and like stir it into like yogurt or something like really fun? Because I'm thinking
Oh,
the
it's also
therapeutics.
a blue color. Like they're like,
Yeah.
a little girl, you
Woo!
call it princess tea. They're in,
Yeah,
this
no,
is your
that's
princess
brilliant.
tea. You could add
To
just a
be
little bit of honey
continued.
to it. If you add a little honey, and then I've made like a lemonade with it. So
Well, that's what I'm
you add a
thinking.
little
But
twist
talk
of
about
sweetener to it. Hmm.
a therapeutic tea or therapeutic drink, especially as we're coming into like spring, or put it with like cucumber water, something, anything to gravitate those taste buds. But it's fun for adults. We're thinking about kids. With some of them, they just need so much help, with
Hmm.
kind of getting their genes to re-engage or the biochemistry. So this is fun. All right, well, that's 10 minutes on tea. More to
Next
come.
week.
So we're supposed to be. Now we're going to talk about folate, so you can all lean in. So folate frenzy, is your breakfast making you anxious? And I think you said this to me, or as we like to say, is folic acid your frenemy? I thought that was brilliant. So we want to jump in, Sarah. Who's going to go first? Why is
Mm.
this even a topic that we want to talk about before we go into the
Yeah.
science?
I think I'll go into, I've had a Facebook group that I'll just call it a forum, because
The
it's
forum,
not a
yeah.
science-based, group like your culinary genomics group is. But I started it years ago with another friend of mine when we couldn't talk about certain topics in a different Facebook group. Like we were talking about methylation and its involvement with, tongue ties and, midline defects. And someone was like, you can't talk about that here, like with the admin. And me and Caitlin were like, well, then we're going to go start our own group.
Hmm.
So we started a group called MTHFR Connections. And that's, we call it the gateway gene, because everyone has heard of MTHFR, or the mother effer gene, or, whatever you want to call it.
I was
Um,
amazed when I heard that. Like, wow.
I had someone say that to me this week. They said, "Do I have the mother effer gene?" I was like, "Okay, well." But yeah, like that's the one that most people have heard of first, and it's a great group title, but that's not the whole story. And I feel like the more we do this in practice, it's maybe 10% of the whole, of what we're doing. And so when people come and say, I was diagnosed with MTHFR, and we go,
Right.
well, we all have MTHFR. It just functions differently person to person. So is it slightly compromised in enzymatic reaction timing, or is it the wild type to where it's functioning fine, or is it you got one or two variants involved with that? But yeah, in the Facebook group, there's a lot of questions around, folic acid to eat or not to eat. And I think it really depends, on the person and what's presenting symptom wise. But I know for my youngest son, when he was a toddler and I was sort of just getting started in some of this, I was like, you know what? I think we're going to take a break for a little while, and we're going to eat gluten free, which does not have to be fortified,
Hmm.
unlike the rest of our wheat and, cereal and pasta and all of that. But the folic acid piece, in the way that it can sort of gum up the folate cycle, if you have certain gene variants that are involved, it really can make a huge difference for those who have mental health or mood, or impulsivity, ADHD, type symptoms. And removing that for my son, adding a methylated, and at the time we had Smarty Pants gummy vitamins. It made a huge difference for him. He used to be like a broken record. He would ask the same question over and over and over again. It was like obsessive compulsive, even at 2 or 3 years old. And it was maddening for me as a mom, where it's like I've already answered that question 8 times, and it was like he could not get a hold of his thoughts to be able to realize we've already talked about that. But it really changed, all of his behavior at that time. And it kind of opened the door to go, well, what is the mechanism for that? Why
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 is that
is that
happening?
happening, and what's going on? And I know in the Facebook group that now has 30,000 people or something like that in it now. So plenty of people are interested in folate, folic acid discussion and MTHFR. But we're still asking that question. Should we be eating folic acid? Should we not? So Amanda, like, you want to dig into that a little
It
bit more?
gets thrown over to me, like what's happening here?
Let me
We're gonna,
lob that big old softball to you.
yeah, thanks a lot. So, should we go back and we should have our good friend Denise Furness on and talk about this? She's our psychic, brilliant friend from Australia, where she really is probably one of the world experts on folic acid folate, and her PhD or thesis was around the impact of folic acid folate on neural tube defects, pregnancies, etc. So we know, I don't know when it was introduced in the legislature, that that we are going to fortify its cereal-based foods, like wheat-based foods, with folic acid, because part of the processing you would actually strip folate out of the food. So it was added back in as folic acid, which is a synthetic form of, quote, folate. So we're going to talk about, what does that mean? What does folate do? Can we get folate through the diet, and why is it important? So if we start at the end, which is food, folate that appears in food is in a form that the body recognizes. And for the most part, it can just enter right into the body. There are some challenges with some receptors with some people, but let's imagine, for the most part, folate is in an active form. When it comes into the body, it gets biotransformed a little bit to get into the body, but the bottom line, it's usable by the body. So we'll put a pin in it right there and then go back and say, well, what is the difference between folic acid and folate? Well, in the end, it becomes the same molecule, right? The body has a mechanism to take the synthetic form and get it into a form the body can use, which is the methyl form. So methyl means it has a carbon and 3 hydrogens attached to the molecule. That's the form the body wants to use. When it comes into the body as folic acid, the body's job is to transform it into the active form. But that's not easy to do. It goes through multiple processes, which require multiple genes to be functioning and behaving. So anytime, if you think about it like a clock, right? Let's see, folic acid comes into the body at 12 o'clock, and we're going to go counterclockwise, and it has to go all the way backwards to 5. So you go through all those numbers or all the steps on the clock, and every single time you pass through, from 11 to 10 to 9 to 8, if you will, those little stops, the opportunity for there to be some dysfunction with that gene presents itself. So for many people, they can't get to the active form of folate because there's so many kind of, what do you call it, like roadblocks along the way. So you already have a journey that can be compromised. That's number one. Number two, and I think this is the thing that's missed the most. There's so many parts of the story. So jump in, Sarah, and then we'll come back to the best form of folate and what do we want to do with folate anyway. But I think the critical point that we see in the science and we see clinically that is not being taught is the folic acid, which many people, if they're eating store-bought food that are wheat or cereal-based, all your cereals are going to be fortified with folic acid. Anything that's handheld, bread, pasta in the United States, think
Even
Australia.
rice now too, right?
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
fortified
really?
too. Yeah, yeah. You have
Wow.
to pay attention to rice as well. Some of it's also been fortified.
So you got to look at your packages, and this is like, it's hard. It's hard for busy families. But anyway, what happens is folic acid, its job, the body says, yep, okay, here it comes. It's in a man-made form. The body, and it goes through like a 2-step process. And this is really important to understand. So it enters and it kind of comes into the body, if you will. We're making science really simple here. And it goes through a 2-step process that is enabled by a gene called DHFR. Are you ready? Dihydrofolate reductase. That's why we call it DHFR. And I remember Denise, our friend in Australia, teaching us, oh my gosh, many, many years ago. She said, it's a big, slow gene. It's a clumsy gene. It does its job. But because it's slow, it ties up that gene. The other role of that gene, when it's free and enabled and not gummed up with folic acid, it also can transform food forms of folate too. They also can come into the body this route. So you can block the active form of folate because the folic acid is kind of gumming up this other process. But the most important thing is DHFR has another role, and this is the kind of the mental health, the neurological side. What it's also doing is helping recycle a molecule that is critical for the production of serotonin and dopamine. So dopamine is our risk reward. It's our risk reward, pat on the back, motivation, focus, brain hormone, along with many other things. And serotonin is I always think it like the oxytocin side. It's our good mood, our loving, I feel good about life, among many other facets of it. Brain hormone. So what DHFR is doing, we're all the way back over in the folate cycle. It's actually recycling a molecule called BH4 that is a driver for the production of dopamine and serotonin. So if you're missing that critical link, which it often is missed, then you can't produce dopamine and serotonin efficiently. Fortunately, we can push the body in another pathway, another way to produce that BH4 molecule, and we can introduce sulforaphane, which Sarah and I use a lot, and that actually will kind of force the body to produce this BH4 molecule. But most people don't know that. A lot of people don't like eating cruciferous vegetables will help in the production of the BH4 molecule. So if you go all the way back upstream, when we use folic acid in food, it can gum up or slow down the production of very, very important brain hormones, which if you think about what we're seeing in mental health, and, parents are wondering with their kids, maybe like they're eating well, we're doing all the things, and they're eating the fruits and vegetables along with their handhelds and their meal kits, and they're wondering, what am I doing wrong? Mm-hmm. And this is a really important connection. And notice I haven't even talked about MTHFR. We haven't got there yet. We're still coming into the body, right? We're still at stage
big,
one.
Slow receptor. So, I've used this analogy, like it's kind of like, if you're in a car and you're coming into a parking lot and you're looking for a parking space, but the parking lot's full, and then there's cars behind you. They're trying to get into the farmer's market, because I know our farmer's market's like that, where you're just trying to find parking.
Yeah, right.
And so like the line is, starting to go down the street, and all of these folate receptors are blocked. And so imagine, well, now what do you do if you're trying to make neurotransmitters, if you're trying to support detoxification, if you're trying to make or break down hormones? So the whole thing is just gummed up. That's the best term I can use. Said that a few times, but it's gummed up.
And so you end up with a very slow response. And the thing that is so critical here, and I know there's sides in the science around this. There are sides in research who absolutely say this is not true. This doesn't slow down things. Folic acid is benign. But we know that it has an epigenetic effect. Let's come back to that. And that was research that you dug out a few years ago, Sarah, that was brilliant. But folic acid, the reason it doesn't get a lot of attention is if we do a blood draw, and we're measuring, quote, folate or folic acid in blood, it comes up as normal. But that folic acid is in serum, it's in blood. It doesn't mean to say it's in tissue. So the way we will look at it is with a red blood cell or white blood cell, but RBC folate, what you want to ask your doctor to measure, if you're listening in, is the red blood cell, not serum, but RBC, because that tells us there's a concentration, there's an availability. That's a whole different marker, because folic acid measured in blood can be seen, it's normal, no problem. You don't need any supplementation, no change to your diet, and yet the person on the couch is like, but I can't think straight. Or my kid is like, like your son, like he keeps being on repeat, and then he's suddenly like pinging, like one day he's on, one day he's off, one day he's highly irritable, the next day it's like, oh, and you can imagine it's sort of like, as you said, gummed up, and then suddenly this parking space is available. Oh, that's a good day, right? But 7 times out of 10, I can't go to the farmer's market because I can't park my car. Well, I mean, I know we're kind of joking here, but what we're talking about is pretty rigorous biochemistry, and it sometimes can be devastating. Can you imagine, like, there's a mom or dad seems to, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this to my child. Well, because you don't know. It's not what you're doing. Now we have an opportunity. But to me, the opportunity is not say, okay, you need a methylfolate supplement. It's like, why don't we just do a pantry check? Let's kind of work with what natural sources of folate are available and acceptable to the palate of you or the individual, your child, and we have to work,
Going back to
steadily.
grains, I know einkorn wheat. I mean,
Einkorn.
wheat is so wonderfully nutrient dense, but we have processed the heck out of
Demonized it
it,
too.
and we've stripped it out to the point that now we have to re-add, nutrients that were lost in the processing. And so it makes you go, like, it's not that I want to demonize, the accessibility of food. That's not what I'm saying. But we also have to consider, like, well, what percentage of our diet is including, fortified foods versus whole foods?
Exactly. And so that's like the first thing
80/20
is,
rule, it's like if 20% of it is, has folic acid in it, it's probably fine.
yeah,
But if it's
exactly.
most, I know lots of kids eat mac and cheese and goldfish, and that's maybe the only thing they'll eat. And they're going to be on this gummed up system, as an autism patient or an ADHD patient for years to come. And you can't medicate your way out of it. I'm sorry to
No,
say.
you can't. And that's where we do a lot of work too. It's like, because oftentimes the medications are maybe not medicating in the right part of the pathway, et cetera, et cetera. And I know I get that question so much. I know you do. Will I ever, especially with adults, can I ever get off these medications? Well, who is our great colleague, Dr. James Greenblatt, in his brilliant book, Finally Focused. So he's an MD and a psychiatrist, and, he'll say, so much of the work is done through food, and some people will need medications. But at least you understand, like, through genetics and the story we're telling you, how you're built, and know how you can kind of refine how you're eating to get the right information to your biochemistry, to the way your body operates. And so we're going to continue around this cycle here, but that piece that I connected is probably one of the biggest ahas that we teach and we see that is missed. So just like, listen to this 10 times so you can understand what we're talking about, But I think the other thing is, the question we're going to get is, well, we're getting folic acid or folate through these fortified foods. What are the natural food sources? And the best and the most natural food sources of folate, and we often would talk greens, foliage, true. But if you look at legumes, particularly like chickpeas, lentils, if you have a hard time with legumes, mung beans, black beans, even white bean, cannellini beans, they're all really good sources of folate. So eating hummus, not everyone's going to make a dal. I love a dal. Not everyone can right away tolerate legumes, because digestively, that's not been available to them, or that's been your
Even
journey.
avocado. Yeah, even avocados.
Avocado, like asparagus, broccoli, kale. So you can think of your foliage, but legumes are powerhouses for many, many reasons. And if you're scared of cooking legumes, pressure cookers do the job, rice cookers do the job, slow cookers do the job. You don't have to boil them anymore. There's lots of ways. But just know that, think about that. And dips are easy to make. Even if you start with the store-bought ones, read the labels. But even you start there, just to, if you're working with your child, start there. Or an avocado guacamole, right? Easy. So these are, again, the reason we're talking about food sources of folate is the body can use them. They can still go through that same pathway I talked about with DHFR, so they can get crowded out, but you can come in at that 5 o'clock, if you think of the clock, that's sort of like the entry that we want for the food form of folate, because then it's ready to do its job. So should we talk about what job it does, and then we're going to come back and talk about MTHFR. So let's say we've talked about what's going on with the cycle, how it affects mental health. But if we go the other way, right, we've got the active form of folate, and what happens next? Why do we want this methyl molecule?
Yeah, so if we're taking folate and we're moving on down the pathway, we involve B12. Choline comes into the picture here as well, kind of around this folate cycle to support methylation. But when we were talking about lab work, if things look like they're in the normal range, well, if your folate gets off, your B12 is often off. And then your homocysteine is off. So it's, we've got a Jenga puzzle. I feel like methylation is, just at the base of a Jenga puzzle, and we're trying to build things on top of it. And the mental health is at the very top, and it's swinging around because it doesn't have a good, stable foundation. But looking at some of those other B vitamins and cofactors like magnesium and zinc that go into that play as well.
Yeah, so what the body is trying to do here, then we're going to go backwards back into the folate cycle to talk again why it's so important, because basically it's on-ramping. It's an on-ramp to the way the body then goes on to produce this molecule, that methyl molecule. So that's a carbon and 3 hydrogen. And that molecule is used in so many pathways in the body. Okay, so it's used to produce creatine phosphate, right? So we talk about why is methylation or this methyl molecule important for energy? So you want to make that connection because you probably talk about it every single day with your athletes. What's creatine phosphate? Why is that important?
Well, we're using it to repair muscle and to repair tissue. And I think you were probably the first one that showed me how you could use it to kind of backfeed to support methylation. So if we're giving creatine and we see its use in sports, of course, but we're seeing its use in neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, because it sort of like helps recycle that energy and is freeing up those methyl donors, that carbon and 3 hydrogens, to do other processes. And so I appreciate the ways that, you shared that in your education and training modules to say, you can use this as a really powerful tool to support that methylation process, to
it's being used a lot
and free it up, So, yeah.
And the creatine phosphate, that phosphate is also attached to adenine ADP to make ATP. So it's an important for the energy currency of the body. So you're like, okay, wait a minute here. What has this got to do with methylation? What has it got to do with folate? So folate prepares the body to hand that methyl group off to 2 other molecules. We'll come back to those. And the result of all of this is you're creating a molecule called, it's the methyl molecule, this carbon and 3 hydrogen. The body then shuttles it to where it needs to go. So we just talked about creatine phosphate. So it helps make that. That helps create the energy currency of the body, ATP. You're dead without ATP, so we need it. Everything goes back to methylation. That methyl molecule is used in the breakdown of both of dopamine and serotonin too. So it helps break down these molecules that are essential in the brain, for example. So methylation, that methyl molecule, is used in multiple pathways in the body over and over again. So the body without methylation isn't alive. So it's this key, it's like a heartbeat of your biochemistry, right? We talk about heart rate variability. This is methylation variability. If you have variability in how your body gets to this molecule, you're in trouble. And all of this comes back through folate, which is why we said, what was the title? Is your breakfast making you anxious? Because so many breakfast cereals, if not all of them, but not all of them, are fortified with folic acid. And it can gum up this one cycle that feeds another cycle that is instrumental to how your body works. So we talked about that on-ramp, here comes folate, it's got its molecule, it's ready to hand it off to get into the big cycle to be the big kid, right, to do its job. And Sarah said, well, to do that, it needs homocysteine and it needs vitamin B12. So they all merge together, and you produce another molecule called methionine that then needs magnesium to produce your master methyl molecule. So all of these ducks have to be in a row. They all have to show up in one of the critical lab values that Sarah and I will look at probably almost with every patient to assess where you are in this process. We're going to measure homocysteine. And homocysteine needs to be at an optimal level. If it's too high, it does a lot of damage in the body, particularly to your vasculature, neurons, cardiovasculature, to your bone. Anything that's vascularized, it will damage if it's high. But the other thing, and I think this is also critical that you and I see, is homocysteine has to be available to help your body detoxify, believe it or not. It sits at the head, I like to say the gateway or the headwaters of the pathway in your body that the many, many important molecules are produced down this pathway. But the major molecule is glutathione. And how many times do we see that pathway gummed up, Sarah? Or we're looking at labs and saying, oh my gosh, they have oxidized lipids, right? We have damage to the DNA potentially. And the glutathione, well, it doesn't even show up. They're not even producing it. So
and there's so much that can disrupt glutathione production. Our body's master antioxidant, like a little mop that goes up and cleans up after all of our decisions. But, I think back into the, methionine also comes from our, amino acids, right? It's protein.
from protein.
So even with that, going back to breakfast cereal, are we doing all folic acid and no methionine? We don't have enough protein.
Good point.
And we've got, a glucose spike in the morning and, all these unmetabolized vitamins that our body doesn't know what to do with. And then maybe we're crashing after that. So I know it's a huge frustration with the school breakfast and lunch program where we have not regulated, sugar and cereals and all of these things that come in, to feed kids in the morning who may not be able to eat breakfast at home, or maybe cereal's just the easiest thing. You got a bowl of cereal, you pour some milk and you're all set. So hopefully that's fat content in the milk is good to keep you satiated and we're having enough protein in the milk to be able to keep us going. So it can be somewhat balanced if you think about it the right way. But because sugar isn't very well regulated, we don't have a limit on I think it's maybe 10 grams per item. But then 25 grams is what the max we want for kids per day. And if they have a chocolate milk and they have a honey bun at school, which are actual things that, and it's not necessarily a dietitian's fault, because we are only doing what the FDA and the USDA is allowing us to do. And so then the manufacturers of all of these bulk products are not required to follow any kinds of rules. So if we don't demand it at the highest levels of the government, we're not going to see the trickle down effect so that dietitians have access to products that are more nutrient dense. So just to kind of defend the food service dietitian in the school system, it's really not about him or her. We got to go higher.
We need to have my good friend Ann Cooper on. She's my neighbor here in Grand Junction. So Chef Ann Cooper is the nation's lunch lady, and she's an amazing chef. And she worked with the Edible Schoolyard Project, which Alice Waters started originally in Berkeley, California. Then Ann moved to Boulder, and I've known her for years. And so she really shook up the Boulder school system and went through a lot of pushback from parents.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? And so, but she just stood her ground, and she said, look, if you want hamburgers, we're making them from scratch and it's grass fed. And she did it. Do you want French fries? We're peeling the potatoes. Yeah. And she's really set up the Chef Ann Foundation now that is beautifully funded, actually from the USDA and other donors, to put salad bars in every school in America. So her work, talk about fights. And she sat on the original organic board. I forget what that was called back in the 90s, maybe the 80s. And she said even that she had to step away from because it started to get politicized. So school lunch and school breakfast is heavily political, but hopefully you start to see where we're coming from. But I think the point that you were making is that to make all these cycles work and to make that detoxification cycle work, which is critical. It's a natural process in the body. It's not woo-woo. The body does it whether you like it or not. Helps you metabolize everything you put in, including medications, hormones, you name it. That's what it does. But it is actually fueled upstream by an amino acid that is predominantly found in animal food, but you can find it strategically in plant food, in all plant food, but much higher levels in plant food. So, maybe we should have bacon and eggs again, a boiled egg on every plate. Somebody said, you said bacon, but you get the point. A farmer's breakfast would probably be a lot better breakfast than a cereal breakfast right now in terms of how the body works. So, no, Sarah and I are not carnivore diet people at all, but just, we're translating the biochemistry. So, but what I think we want to go back to, Sarah, and talk about is, it goes all the way back to your group. And what was it called? MTHFR? What was the name of it?
Yeah, MTHFR.
So let's go back to the folate cycle and talk about MTHFR. Like, where is it in this cycle and what is it doing? Or am I answering that one?
Well, I think what people think of MTHFR, they automatically go, I can't process folic acid. That is just kind of the standard statement if you're not necessarily reading biochemistry pathways in the way that we are. But as we explained, earlier in the episode, it's actually that DHFR that has a hard time processing folic acid. So, but it's got that downstream impact on MTHFR. So not completely correct to say, well, I have MTHFR, therefore I can't tolerate folic acid. And I don't suggest everyone be so legalistic about their diet because, we talked about vagus nerve during our IHS episode at length, and the stress that we are under about food. If we add a lot of fear to that, we're not going to digest. We're not in the parasympathetic rest and digest. But yeah, the MTHFR piece is just one piece in the puzzle, and we're losing our minds over a single SNP, which, Amanda and I started there too. I'll be completely upfront. I was the patient first, and then I was the practitioner. I was like, oh, this is just one little,
one figure on the clock. So what's happening is like folate, here we go. It can come in at 5 o'clock. This is my analogy, right? But what happens if it comes in with folic acid at 12 o'clock? Every one of those kind of numerals on the clock represents a gene, like I said. So dihydrofolate reductase creates a molecule called THF, tetrahydrofolate reductase. Then it goes around the clock. And there's another gene, MTHFR1. It passes through that, and then it arrives ready at MTHFR. And so you've already got a number of genes that can be in the way, and MTHFR can be working absolutely perfectly. And it has like sibling. There's a 1298, and a 677. So it has like siblings. And one of them can be working perfectly and the other isn't. So a lot of times what we see is as you approach MTHFR, you get ready to merge onto another highway here. It can slow the process down by maybe about 40% of producing the active form of folate. But just because the gene is in a certain form that suggests that does not mean to say it's so. We do know that if you have MTHFR like the 677 and it's a TT form, it's pretty slow. But we don't immediately say, oh, that's it, you got to take a supplement. What we then do is measure. We're talking to you, we can hear, we know from a symptoms perspective what might be going on, but it's not a reason to reach for a supplement because number one, they're very expensive. Number two, they're very, very highly, what's the word? They can be, what's the word I'm looking for? They can be over...
A pretty high dose.
High dose, that's what I'm looking for. If you look, even a folate by itself, the methylfolate can be very high dose for any human being. And oftentimes it's accompanied by B6 and B12. B12 can be in the 10,000% range. And oftentimes what MTHFR needs is support from riboflavin B2 to optimize it. So we can actually work looking at that gene, measuring, does this individual actually need folate at all? Do they have sufficiency? And if they do need a little bit of a push, it's done at a micro level. I don't use a B complex hardly at all, Sarah. I don't know if you do. I'm very, very conservative with these vitamins.
Yeah, I do occasionally. I know that's where I started with, my own digestion and I think for some people who maybe have already done some of the work to support detoxification first, I know that I see this a lot where, if we add methylated vitamins to a fire, it's gasoline. We're
Oh,
going to
you're
see
right.
major dysregulation of mood and behavior and
I do too.
neurotransmitters. So we do have to be really cautious with that. We have to unclog the drain first. So like an Epsom salt bath is a great approach to that. Get them sweating. I like to ask my clients, I'm like, are you sweating? And they're like, some of them are like, no. And I'm like, we got to get you sweating. Like we got to
One way or
support,
another.
we got to take out the metabolic trash before we really do a lot of those other things to support it. But
Yeah.
I mean, I like, Christine's Houghton's approach with her defense cell that there's just a couple of really light cofactors in her
Light.
supplement and
Yes.
defense cell that I think is enough for most people
I agree.
to be
That's
able
what I
to meet
use.
the need. So very occasionally I'll do a B complex if they've just got so much fatigue that I'm like, let's just get you back online. I don't think it's going to trigger
100%.
anything for you, but it's not something I use long term, or it's like, once a week or, a couple times a week or, a couple times a month, not something that's daily. Um,
100%. Your
so
body knows how to engage. Like what Sarah's doing is just getting the body to re-engage. If the B vitamin depletion is such, like you said, and you got the walking through sludge and fatigue, because the B vitamins are used in the energy production, but they're also used neurologically really, heavily. I could see why you would jump in and do that. But
we're
I think,
also
yeah,
making, I was going to say, we're also making a huge mistake in sort of the energy drinks department. Combining tons of caffeine with a bunch of B vitamins. And, I know teenage athletes are thinking this is going to be the thing that gives me the edge and, that improves my performance. And we all know that it's like, are you eating breakfast? Are you, doing your pre and post, hydration and fueling? But, the Genomic Edge program is the way to do that. Not,
that's
it's
right.
like the
Learn how to,
individual
yes.
but the energy drink thing, I've had to tell parents of teen elite swimmers who are going Division 1, like, I don't recommend any energy drinks, period. Like, there's nothing you can say to convince me that this is a good idea for the body. There's
If
too many
anything, it
other
would
variables.
burden it even more, right?
Hmm.
It's because it's trapped. Well, it's trapped. We have to be careful with that. But yeah, it would actually place an even higher burden. I
Yeah.
think too, because I know, like we look at patients together, clients together. That, and I'm just thinking of athletes, but we'll take it away from athletes. That we have to be really careful with B vitamins because you heard me say they have a very high need in neurological pathways, but so do those methyl groups. So that methyl molecule is used dynamically by a gene called COMT, which many of you have heard of. If you're talking about MTHFR, you're probably saying, well, I've got COMT. Guess what? We all do. So congratulations. You are not special and neither am I. It's part of the human infrastructure. We all have MTHFR. You would not be alive without it. And COMT, we all have it. You wouldn't be alive either. You'd be
Are
probably
you
in
fast
jail.
or slow? That's the question. People say I have COMT, and I'm like, is it fast or slow? That
Yeah, is it
changes
fast or slow?
everything.
So
Yeah.
what happens, you hear saying fast or slow, so it exists in three form, a fast, sort of the nature's form, although that can be nuanced, right? The wild type, and then the slow form. And if you throw a lot of methylated vitamins, or even SAMe, which a lot of people take, at someone who has a slow
Ew,
COMT,
bad.
they are on the ceiling. If they're a kid, right? They're the meltdown in the supermarket, right? They're the suddenly really aggressive, argumentative teenager. They're the parent who can't sleep, hyper moody, hyper anxiety. And if you drink a bunch of green tea with it, ooh, so you've just taken a really bad
Poison.
situation and made it really slow. So can you imagine taking something you want to drain and you put a stopper in it, that's exactly what you do in green tea, which is good for us. It's not great for some people in,
Yeah,
in
the
small amounts.
EGCG that's in green tea can further slow down a
Slow
CM.
that down.
It's different for everybody, so it's kind of like
It is.
just listen to your body. If you're like, when I drink green tea, this is how I feel. It's like, then don't do that.
Yeah, not good because, and the thing is, you're hearing us making these observations because we're reading how your genes work. And when you work with enough of genes, you kind of say, You know what, green tea and you, let's dial it back, or like once every other day if you really want it for the therapeutic, but it doesn't work for you, or at least if you're presenting with anxiety, whatever. However, just because you have a slower form of this gene doesn't mean to say that what we're saying is so. In other words, it's very nuanced, but in general, we can see that there are certain things just don't work. They're kind of, quote, good for you. Not so much, So that's why we can look beyond the sequence, right? That's why we're talking about what we're talking about, because we are looking at sequences and patterns and how every single human is built, so we can literally get to the cutting edge of precision nutrition and precision eating to optimize, your health span and your well-being. So, yeah, so we kind of went all the way. Hopefully, you're understanding the folate frenzy is your breakfast making you anxious. We're really talking about folic acid and how these cycles work in the body. But so, Sarah, if we like to have a little bit of a theme. We talked about here's the issue, here's the impact. We've gone through that. We talked about MTHFR, right, to help. It's a critical gene, but it can run fast or slow. It can be sludgy. For the most part, you can work with it without having to do any kind of supplementation. But we also have our acronym FLAIR, right? Food, lifestyle, aromatics, R, E.
Replenishment. Yeah,
Replenishment
replenishment
and
being like what
energy.
supplements you might consider, and E kind of like what energy, are we going to give this, or how do you want to spend your energy? Our
So
flair
the F,
acronym.
yeah, so F, let's end this with our FLAIR. So food. Best sources of food-based folate because it's in a form the body can immediately use without worrying about MTHFR. It's already right there. So it doesn't have to worry about that. So we talked about legumes, right? So, or pulses if you're outside the United States. What else did we mention for food?
We yeah, avocado. We've talked about. I mean, I think liver is like nature's multivitamin just in
Oh,
general. So
true. Yeah,
like even just talking to people about like, hey, would you consider incorporating liver? And lots of people are like, no, and other people are like, I've never thought about it. And so
right.
I think this is a great opportunity. We're getting further and further away from families who ate liver and onions growing up
I
into,
did
well,
too.
you don't necessarily need to go liver and onions. You can cut it up really small and add it to a meatball, a meatloaf, a stew, a chili, and a
Very good
taco, a
point.
taco meat, really easily. You don't need a lot, and you don't need to do it every day. But it is very nutrient dense.
Our colleague Kate Waters, who I created Genius in Your Kitchen with, she's a chef and brilliant clinician in the UK. But she actually is part of the Genius in Your Kitchen, the cooking program that we had. She created these really cool liver pates, but it was mostly grind. I think it was chicken. She used chicken liver, which is softer, right, on the
Mhm.
palate. And then pulled that into, I forget what else, what we ground up, but it was a neat recipe you could probably post. And and they just became like little nuggets. And like you said, you're hiding the chicken, but you're getting the value, this multivitamin like CoQ10, vitamin A, D, all the B's or many of the B's, B2, B6 or what have you, in that bite. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, with the folate piece. And then
Add
like
liver to your diet. That's the
if you
story.
can, and if, yeah, yeah, I know. Because that is actually what our ancestors did. Let no hoof be left behind, right? And I think we've talked about it before that where I grew up in England, but throughout Europe, people still, you're eating chicken liver pate. It's a natural process that you buy as part of charcuterie throughout Europe. It doesn't matter where you are. That is eaten.
In the US, it's dirt cheap, and you can find it sitting on the shelf just waiting, only a couple dollars. So if you want to talk about inexpensive implementation to optimize methylation,
There you
like you can go
go.
further. Everyone else has done a
And
favor for you.
B12. And
And B12.
B12. And a natural energy source of CoQ10, which is
Yep.
instrumental to energy production. But, okay, if you're not on the liver train yet, we get it. So
Beets.
asparagus, broccoli, right? Yeah. I mean, just look it up. You don't need a list, but I would say if low hanging fruit liver, low hanging fruit legumes.
Hmm.
Okay. Okay, lifestyle. Food, L is for lifestyle.
Yeah, what would I do for lifestyle for
I think it
MTHFR
depends.
methylation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say supporting detoxification pathways, as I mentioned, getting you sweating, getting you moving, making sure you're having a daily bowel movement. I know how is that rolled up into folic acid, but yeah, detoxification is such a huge piece in supporting methylation. It's like if that's not working, methylation is going to suffer.
I think also from the mental health perspective, and
Mm,
we could talk a lot about this. Don't let somebody tell you it's in your head. If you're
mhm.
feeling anxious, you're feeling off, if your kid or what have you, if you don't think you're getting the right treatment, and don't let medication be pushed on you immediately, do try and seek out a practitioner who's reading genomics like us, because we spend so long and so much of our time unpacking these pathways. We can see where the inefficiencies are, where the blocks are, without guessing. Save you a lot of time and money. And if you feel like you're throwing supplements at yourself and you can't sleep or whatever, just don't let somebody tell you it's in your head, or go off and do ABC, or you need this program. Honestly, if you're struggling, come back to genomics, because it will save you so much time, because we can see
Yeah.
how you're built without the guesswork. So
Yeah, and I
that's
would
so
say the psychiatry and psychology side of it. I was just at an IEP meeting earlier this week, and the staff in the room were talking about all the services that are available, for special needs and IEPs and 504s, and it's like occupational therapy and physical therapy. And at the end, there was an OT in the room, and so she had something to say. And so then I raised my hand. I said, since we're talking about interdisciplinary work together, I really wish nutrition therapy was covered and was part of this process, because we've got ADHD kids who can't focus in class, and we're not, and the parents that were in the room who have kids with ADHD were like, yes,
uh-huh.
like they know that there is an issue with their kids' nutrition, but they don't know, they're not the experts. They don't know what to do about that. So the folic acid piece can absolutely go hand in hand with how we're supporting the psychology and psychiatry of it all. And the presenter, the psychologist, was like, "Can I get your card? Like, this is
There
really
you go.
fascinating, talking about genomics." And I have an intern, a psychology intern from
Oh, that's great.
Butler down the street, that is like, "Can I just get a few hours with you? I really want to learn more about this genomics piece." And this is all mostly on the side. Like, it's not really even part of her program or needs. But I was like, "Absolutely, let's talk."
Let's
So
talk.
trying to influence those who are in other areas of the field of healthcare that can go, okay, I learned a little bit of this. How do I incorporate it into my practice?
No, exactly. Okay, so lifestyle is a big one. Is a lot around that. Aromatics will always be our herbs or herbs. And again, that sort of depends. I'm not sure we can implement aromatics to push methylation, which is what we're talking about, but I think we'd use aromatics more to calm the pathways that are impacted by poor methylation, right? Is would
Hmm.
be how I think about that.
Go
But
back
you'll
to
know
our teas.
that's what where the teas. Yeah, we
Go
talked
back
about
to our
teas
teas.
at the beginning. Yes, so go back to the beginning. We talk about teas. A good cup of tea.
Yeah.
So R.
Replenishment. Yeah. I think, if we're just starting at the basics, just reducing folic acid intake and see what happens.
Yeah.
You don't need to go crazy, but just kind of think differently. Like, how can I incorporate more whole foods, slightly less, enriched foods in the diet? And just, you might notice a difference without necessarily even replenishing anything. But maybe you do need a little bit of support from a multivitamin or a methylated, but just do that cautiously. And
Very. Yeah, if you are replenishing with a supplement, really, unless you're working side by side with a healthcare practitioner who's validated the need for it through testing, right? And they're not saying, here, just take this, you'll feel better. then just proceed with caution. But if you're not working with a healthcare provider, then do shop really wisely.
Yeah.
And look for supplements that we like to say that physiologically compatible, meaning they're not in the tens of thousands and not maybe even in the hundreds.
I think I usually see, a choline need first. Like if I was going to supplement, it might not be a B complex, it might be a phosphatidylcholine or a
I
phospholipids
agree.
first, and then, it kind of works itself out. So,
That's true. We need to really talk about choline for a long time, because I think it comes up pretty much with every single
often.
client I'm seeing right now. But we'll put a pin in that one because that will take us way off. And I know you're all excited to listen to this, but that's it's something we need to piggyback on this discussion when I think about it, Sarah,
Hmm.
because it is a side door to supporting a disrupted folate cycle. If you can't get that one to work, the body is so brilliant. It has a detour route that we use a lot. So, yeah, replenishment. We're gonna look at our episodes we have coming up and see if we'll bump that one in there because it's really important. E is energy, right?
Energy. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
which we spin in a lot of ways, right? So where are you going to put your energy? Is that how we want to explain that one here, or what are you
Yeah,
thinking?
I think, it's kind of like what basket are you going to put your eggs in? And what are you going to focus on? And I think what I mentioned about, you know, diet first, nutrition first, supporting detoxification and watching those things kind of unravel and work themselves out, I think is probably the best approach here without panicking that you've got MTHFR. Don't
No,
panic.
no. True. You know what? I don't know if it was in this when we were talking earlier here, when we were talking IHS, we were talking about color, right? You said
Hmm.
with the athletes, it's protein, a carbohydrate, and a color. Maybe we were talking about kids. So I'm thinking if you're thinking about folate and detoxification, let's also think about color. You want one green. And I would almost say, like for folate, if you want to do color, think orange. Like mangoes or tomatoes or oranges are something you can think about. And detoxification, think green. And we want you to go into the cruciferous department. So think cabbage or kale or cauliflower. And if that's scary, think bok choy. What else could we put in? Arugula, if you love that. Or look for a salad or vegetable mix, if that's where you have to go, where there's something in there that's got has bok choy or kale. Mizuna is often in there, or arugula. And so what you're doing is you're using very subtly cruciferous vegetables. They are instrumental to how we push the body to detoxify. So you think green, but think specialty green. And if you don't like that, think white for cauliflower, even if it's riced cauliflower, that you're putting in something. That's another way to help the body detoxify. So put your energy into those ideas is probably a good
Yeah, and
way
I
to
would
end
say,
up.
yeah, I'll add too, my son who was kind of off the rails with his broken record, we were out gardening in the front yard and I was growing Swiss chard at the time and he said, "Mom, can I eat this?" And I said, "Absolutely. And also thanks for asking because I grow rhubarb and you don't want to eat the leaves of that." So,
Good.
um yeah, so I was like, "Thanks for asking and yes, you may." And so he just grabbed, the leaves off of the Swiss chard in the front yard and was just eating it. So I think getting your kids involved in gardening is one
Yeah.
of the best ways to get them interested in trying new foods and make it fun. Like if you're trying three different kinds of apples and three different kinds of almond butter and three different kinds of greens and going, which one do you like best? So giving them power of choice and making it adventurous is a
I
wonderful way
totally agree.
to
That's what
incorporate new foods. And I have picky kids, so I'm not saying we have all the answers for the kids that are only eating goldfish and mac and cheese, but you can, start to we have a try it approach in our home. And so breakfast and lunch is mostly like things I know that you'll eat because you need to eat to focus at school. But dinner time, it's like there's two things on your plate I know you're going to eat, and one thing that, is new that you're going to try. And so for Wesley, that was like a blueberry.
oh,
And that
bless
was
his
very
heart.
and that was very hard for him, like the oral texture and, all
Yeah.
that was going on. But it's like give them small goals and, reward that. So not making it necessarily a battle, but going, hey, we try new things and this is fun. And we like to travel as a family. So we want to keep trying new foods wherever we go. And these are life skills.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Sarah. So we said we'd end here because we're
Yeah.
just over an hour. But we said we're going to end with share one unique observation or insight you've observed, like in the last couple of weeks or couple of weeks. It can involve methylation or anything, any unique pattern that you and I may have talked about. I said, oh, yeah, that keeps coming up. And what that means. Because we are beyond the sequence. So we're going to
We
take
are
you beyond
beyond
the
the
sequence.
sequence. I think in the last week I've had one client, I think I posted it in your Facebook group, that I was seeing just, a disruption of an intolerance of magnesium. And so we were
Yeah, that
chatting
was
about that a little
interesting.
bit, where she did have a CBS mutation or, variant where down the pathway right below, the folate cycle where we're going to make glutathione. There's a disruption there where it's like, okay, I think we are backed up there, which backs up into the methylation cycle. And so just things that maybe someone
Yeah.
isn't tolerating very well, and then it's changing their overall health, whether that's, she also wasn't sweating. So she was someone that I was like, okay, let's get you sweating. So it's, the little clues that you pick up on that the drain is
The
plugged.
drain is blocked. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm also seeing, mood dysregulation in people who have medications prescribed, and we run a neurotransmitter test, and the glutamate for this person
Glutamate
was at
was
like
through the roof.
9,000, and like the regular the reference range, the upper limit was like 125, and she's at 9,000 with her glutamate, which we can have another podcast
Yeah,
on
that's really
neurotransmitters.
important
But
because some of
yeah.
that can be coming from diet, right? But other of it is genetic, that we
Hmm.
actually have to really push the genes to break that down. But wow, it can come from a
Yeah.
lot of places like imbalance, like in the citric acid cycle or whatever. Like, wow, no,
Vagus
we
nerve
need to
too.
do
Yeah.
what? Through what?
Vagus nerve
Oh, the
trauma,
Vegas. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
PTSD. Yeah,
Exactly.
how all that plays. It strains methylation. I think, is the take home there is the the strain on methylation can come from chronic stress. The more stressed you are, you're sort of burning through those methyl donors really, really quickly, and
That's
we
true.
either have to change what's happening in the mindset, and back up a little bit, or we have to fuel better, to be able to meet those
Yeah, and you're
metabolic
right
needs.
that if you can fire up the vagus nerve to do some of that hard work while that can kind of, even if someone isn't aware of it, they will become aware of it. It will do some of that down regulation for you so you can work on the inputs, right? So it's doing like a double duty. That's an interesting thought. I have seen, and I actually shot a picture to you, like if we share anything between us, it's absolutely anonymized and a snapshot. So there's never any sharing of names or personal information or anything. But I shot a report to you and said, this is the second one I've seen like this, where when we're using 3x4, they use color. So we can use color to explain an impact to a client, whereas we're looking what the genes are doing. Two in a week where at the cellular level, everything was maroon or purple. When you see maroon or purple, it's like high alert, like this needs your attention. I would say now, but it just means that it doesn't matter what's going on with that individual. We have to bring what's happening in their cells online. We have to help them detoxify. We have to fine tune this methylation process we were talking about, figure out why they have so much oxidative stress, which is amping their immune system, so they often come with autoimmunity. And I'm like, no wonder these people are sick, Sarah. It's like, and it can be sometimes if you're not used to seeing that, it could be overwhelming. Where on earth do you start? Well, when we see people like that, everything stops. Like, this is where we're going to work. I know you've got this issue and you're complaining about this and want to do this, but this is the why. This is the root cause. And often these individuals have been treated for mold or SIBO and all kinds of stuff that are just basically the outward expression of a body that is not in gear. Like it is like trying to be in fourth gear and we haven't gotten to first gear. And so
Not receiving any of the treatment
not
that you're
receiving,
giving it.
they're not.
Yeah,
The
I've had
body
a
is,
few like that.
yeah. And and wow. And it's actually makes our work kind of easy and like, oh, we know exactly what we need to. But for the individual, it's like, okay, we're doing this for 3 months. I know you want to do that, but we have to do this. And you're going to everything will re-engage. Your gut will start to feel better, but you do not need a gut protocol right now. Or maybe you do, but we have to, it doesn't matter what we're doing there if we haven't controlled the inputs and get the chemistry of your body to flow. So
The
that was number
order.
one,
Yeah, I was going to say the order that we do things
the
in
order.
often does matter.
The process and the order matters. You're right. And, with the clients, like, we're going to do this. How do you feel? Great. Done that. Next step is this. Next step is this. But it takes a long time to get dysregulated. But for all these individuals, usually when they're everything, they just feel terrible. They're walking through mud. They have chronic fatigue. And then you look at the genes like, well, here's why. And they're like, oh, thank you. Thank you. It doesn't mean we get out of it easily. It just means we know the why. And so that was really came to me. And then it was another sequence you and I were just looking at. Often see it with females, but not only. And it's a set of genes that line up. So CYP19A1, CYP17A1, and ESR2. And all of these are in hormone detoxification. And a lot of times when all those genes run slow together, they're kind of all working we call that in steroid metabolism. But oftentimes we can see these people with very high levels of testosterone, lower levels of estrogen. So you could see PCOS, endometriosis, hormonal stuff, really heavy periods, or not, or they ping between the two. It's sort of like it's that idea of that dam that you were talking about, or look, there's no parking space and suddenly there is. So the period this month was great, but for the other 9 months, they're in absolute misery. And nobody understood them. A lot of times with my client population, they may be perimenopausal and saying, this is where I've been all my life. I finally gave up and had a hysterectomy. How sad is that? Yeah. And yet in the genetics, not that we can solve everything, but it's interesting. That is a sequence that I see, and I can turn around and ask that person, so how were you as a teenage? How are you doing? How are your periods? How was your fertility? So just an example of a pattern that makes us think to ask questions to validate that journey. So those are my two.
Yeah, I think we're talking about those with endometriosis as
Yes.
well. And some of those clients, and I'm seeing so much histamine. It's like histamine and endometriosis are going hand in hand, but I think methylation is suffering. It's the methylation pours into
Right,
the
with the
histamine
histamine
bucket.
piece. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that is becoming more and more common, the endometriosis. And now you'll be able to look at the gene piece. It's interesting. You're thinking beyond the hormones to like the metabolics. And if you are putting out the fires of inflammation, which you will be in pain with endometriosis, and you're right, you're going to see probably a really high histamine response that's going to demand a lot of nutrients like iron in those methyl groups. So all right, we're off in like a field here for people. We wanted you anyway. We wanted you to just end on like, this is some of the interesting stuff we're seeing. So beyond the sequence, looking at DNA and looking at the stories we can tell by reading people's CNA. So Sarah, I think we're going to put a pin in it for this episode.
Yeah, you guys will be on the edge of your seat to know what we're going to talk about next. I think we could record like 10 episodes at once. It's like, okay, next topic. So
next topic, choline.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah. So thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.